Hello, all listeners of the Ukrainian Roots Radio Nash Голос. I want to remind you that you can listen us in Vancouver on 13:20 a.m. Saturday from 6 to 7 p.m. and of course in Nanaimo on 101.7 FM every Wednesday from 11 to 12 p.m. My name is Anton Lysенko, and today our studio joined a very interesting guest. His name is Peter. He was a volunteer in Ukrainian armed forces. He's Canadian, and not many foreign military specialists participated in the war in Ukraine, but he's very brave, and it's going to be very interesting to listen his story, what he saw in Ukraine, and what's his opinion about this war and about the end of this war. Hello, Peter, and welcome to the studio of Nash Голос, Ukrainian Roots Radio.
Thank you for having me, Anton. It's a privilege.
I want to begin with the situation, what is going right now on the battlefield in Ukraine. Russian armed forces are moving very fast. If you compare to the previous period, they moving like several kilometers a day, and they are very close to Pokrovsk. This is a quite big city on eastern Ukraine. And what do you think? Why the situation appear? What did the Russian change in the strategy and the tactic?
First, I'm very good at some things, and I don't like guessing at things that I'm not good at. But it is a fair question, and I will answer it. But that is not my specialty of understanding something of that magnitude and how things work. I'm more of a tactician and a ground soldier, a leader of a small group of men. But this kind of macro view that we're seeing now for sure is outside my area of expertise. But I have an opinion, but I would caution people that, it's only just me. I'm not trying to speak for like I'm an intellectual that studies that all day. But if you look, sadly, how the Russians have won every conflict that they've won is by sacrificing their population. In the Second World War, they sacrificed often 10 soldiers for every German soldier, 10 tanks for every German tank. And that's their advantage. They're a big country with lots of resources. So when I see the long game, what's playing out now with into the third year, I see the Russians just using the fact that they simply have more resources and more people. Of course, the sanctions and the free world is supposed to put as much pressure on them as possible. But then you see countries that playing both sides or blatantly on Russia's side, or they play both sides. They sell Russian oil, they buy cheap Russian oil, and they allow their economy to flourish, or like Iran, where they just straight out are selling them drones that are being used in Ukraine. So the issue is in how they are having these successes is Ukraine is a much smaller country that I think all of your listeners know. The total experts, not people like me who are just trying to give our humble opinion, but the total experts said Ukraine would be done in less than 3 weeks, 10 days. They thought Ukraine wouldn't exist anymore. So the fact that we're into our third year shows the absolute fighting strength of the Ukrainian people and the soldiers. So this is the disadvantage, is that the country is so small, and many heroes have been lost in Ukraine already. And Russia doesn't care about their people. They don't have to answer to the population, why are you making this war that doesn't need to be, we're losing so many people. That's their advantage. Now, it sounds bleak, but the advantage to Ukrainians are they're fighting on their land, for their land. And I met many soldiers who said, where should I go? What should I do? Where should I go? This is my land, and I won't give it up. And I will stay here and fight. And so I think many Russian soldiers hopefully are wondering what the hell they're doing in Ukraine and why are they dying there. And that will make a soldier not fight as effectively. That's a fact. Soldiers fighting on their own land will always fight more voraciously than soldiers fighting in a foreign land. And I've been to Pokrovsk, and so it hurts me deeply to see that the evacuations going on there and the advance that the Russians have made. It's not good. But then I try to counter that with the incursion that we've made into Kursk and say, well, we are letting them know what it's like to have foreigners on their soil.
Thank you for the answer. Of course, the Ukrainian fighting for their own land, for their own country, for democracy. What other advantages which is help to Ukraine to win the war and survive as a country?
They are trying, from what I saw. Now, this is personal experience. So before I was just giving my unspecialistic opinion. This is what I saw there. They are trying not to be like the Russian Empire when it was the USSR and all the countries, Poland included, and Ukraine, they were under the Iron Curtain of communism and their system. I did get to learn that system, and I saw the differences, and I saw that the Ukrainians are trying, and I even had officers saying, we're not doing it the Russian way. That's the Soviet way. And so the Ukrainians are trying to change. Well, first they want freedom, and they want freedom from the classic oppression and straight out stupidity of the Russian system. And so they want to be different. And this is why I had such amazing support from the officers that didn't know who I was, but took me in and gave me a lot of resources and gave me a lot of support, because they said, we want the Canadian way. We don't want to follow, because men my age in Ukraine were all raised under the Russian military system. And it's not a good system. Unless you have 10 times the population of your enemy, then you can bleed it. But it's not tactically intelligent. And so the advantage that the Ukrainians have is, as fast as possible, they are trying to not do it the Russian way. They want to do it the Ukrainian way. And I don't say the West's way, because Ukraine is different. Every war is different. The technology, of course, the drones are radically changing combat, and everybody's watching that. So they are using Western doctrine, they're using European doctrine, and then their own unique adaptation for this new war to make a better system. And that is their significant advantage, because they're not just trying to do it the old Soviet way. And the longer the Russians keep doing it the Soviet way, the bigger the advantage is for us. Because freedom and creativity and the ability to think critically and not just follow that person in front of you, that is a foundational difference in military theology.
How long Russia can continue to fight with Ukraine using such a Soviet Union strategy and tactic?
That question, I think, needs to be asked to the mothers of Russia. How long are they going to let their children get killed and they don't revolt? That's the oppression of the Putin system. The people there are highly oppressed. Freedom. This is no surprise to anybody who with half a brain that independently looks at what's going on and how that country is. They don't have freedom of speech there. They don't have freedom of expression and vote and government. And so how long are the Russian people going to put up with a war that is an unjust war, an illegal war, and then their men are dying there? How long do they want to put up with that? As long as they are willing to put up with it, then I guess their men, and I'm sure some women, are continue to come into Ukraine and killed and sent home, if they're lucky to get sent home. But of course, they get paid a lot of money. And so they say, hey, I'm going to go to Ukraine, and if I can survive there, I'll make a lot of money, and then I'll be wealthy if I get back with my life. So some of them do it truly as a paid soldier, just for the money, not because they're fighting for anything that they think is just or righteous. They just want to get rich. And the soldiers Russian soldiers do get paid a significant amount of money. So some of them are just mercenaries, you could say.
When you were in Ukraine, did you have a chance to speak with any Russian soldiers who was captured by Ukrainian?
Yes, but of course, because I don't speak Ukrainian or Russian, I mean, I learned a lot in the time I was there. but I'm surprised how fast I'm losing those words. If you would say some of them, I would probably recognize them, but I'm really losing my skills very quickly. But so I never talked to them, but other soldiers talked to the Russian prisoners, and then they told me what they said. But yeah, directly, I can't talk to them unless they speak English, and that didn't happen.
What's the motivation of the Russian soldiers, for your opinion, from your experience?
From what the Ukrainians were saying to those prisoners, and what they said was different. That is what I already mentioned, that the one doctor I heard speaking to the injured as they were fixing him. One soldier, he had his leg blown off by a mine, a Russian soldier. And he was in the hospital, and they had tourniquets on him. The Ukrainian medics had put tourniquets on him, and he was in the hospital, and the doctors were treating him. And he was saying, I'm not here. I didn't want to be here. He's saying what you'd expect someone to say. And the doctors were treating him very well, but they were telling him he's a liar. He's there to get rich off the dead people that he killed in Ukraine. And he denied it. And he said, no, I'm not. But the people there that were speaking to him said, no, you're a liar. You come here to make money off of the dead civilians that you kill in Ukraine. That was the conversation. But yeah, he was being treated at the hospital, that man.
You already mentioned that Ukrainian armed forces are kind of in the middle between the West and the East, and Ukraine creating their own way. Is Ukraine changing the tactic and strategy of the NATO or European forces?
I guarantee you that all tactician militaries around the world, wherever they sit on this war, are all watching and telling their staff, we need to watch this, we need to change our tactics, we need to learn, because Ukraine and Russia right now are on the cutting edge of the most modern war, where drones have changed everything. When I was in the military many years ago, as a young man, there was no such thing as a drone at all. And now when we talk about the makeup of a patrol, one of the officer or one of the soldiers will be a drone soldier watching for drones, either watching for enemy drones or flying your drone to get an advanced view of what's coming around the corner, or is there an ambush around this valley. Those are tactics that were not done. And if they were, when they were starting, let's say more 10 years ago, 15 years ago, they were big, heavy drones that couldn't fly long. Now we know the technology that drones can fit in your pocket, and you can fly them into a building and take a look around the corner before you step into there. It's changing everything. And it's very hard to surprise the enemy, because you see them gathering and they see you gathering. And then you send a missile because you see enough soldiers to make it worth to send a missile. And the same thing from our side. So the other countries of the world are learning about how Ukraine is succeeding in that battle with the enemy and the invaders.
I absolutely agree with you that drones are changing this war, and not only on the land, also in the Black Sea. We know that Ukrainian armed forces, they started to use drones during the war in Donbass, but then like Russian also implemented drones, and it looks like the both sides going next to each other, and it's very difficult to get a real advantage and to win this war for Ukraine.
What you're saying is completely true and accurate, and it makes me remember, I said something that I regret. I was talking to a group of soldiers, and there was a young man there. I said to them, this is our tactics, this is what we're going to do, this is how we're going to proceed with our tactics against the enemy. I said, I'm glad they're stupid. And this young soldier, Ukrainian soldier, of course, everybody I was with was Ukrainian. I was the only foreigner that was there. And so this Ukrainian young man said to me, and you could see when I said, luckily they're stupid, he looked at me and twisted his head a little bit, and he said, he wanted to speak, and I was speaking. And so I said, yeah, what do you have to say? And he says, they're not stupid anymore. And that made me feel stupid, because you should never underestimate your enemy. And I had called them stupid, and this young man had the experience that what is happening is that if Ukraine is going to kill 5,000 Russians with a tactic, the Russians will learn from those deaths. And if Ukraine is in the advance, which we were, if we're advanced in our technology use and how we employ them, then the Russians are going to learn from those wins that we are having, and they are going to see, oh, let's do it the Ukrainian way. Let's do it their tactics, whether you're soldiers moving through a field, soldiers moving through a trench, soldiers cleaning out a building, or soldiers flying drones, or just sending missiles and the technology that you use to gain the intelligence to where to send the missile. Each time that we win and we kill those invaders, we suffer the consequences of they go, hey, that didn't work. Let's do it the Ukrainian way. And they will adapt your tactics. And that is another reason when you asked earlier, why are they having these advantages? Because they are not fighting the way they did in 2022. They're sure not fighting the way they did in 2014. They are learning from their brutal failures. And that's not to our advantage. So then the Ukrainians have to be ahead of the curve, we say, right? They have to say, okay, what can we innovate? What can we do now to surprise them again? And if that answers that question, I want to say something that you introduced me as very brave. And I'm remembering that, and I wanted to deal with that. You said that. I want your listeners to understand that I chose to be a soldier in Canada. I chose to become a policeman in Canada. And that was my calling. That was my skill set. And then I chose to go to Ukraine to fight along those heroes and the very brave men. That was my choice. Most everyone that I fought with for the whole year that I was there were volunteers who were not professional soldiers before this invasion. Those men are much, much braver than me because I had a calling to do this. And I was trained to do it in a very good country. Canada does a very good job of training their soldiers, does a very good job of training their police in tactics and firearms. I had that advantage. And I'm older. So I had all my life experience. These young men and old men, I mean, of course, there's men older than me that are serving. They were cooks and chefs and drivers and teachers. One of the medics was a surgeon that we had in our unit at the front line. He was a doctor, surgeon, and now he was a frontline medic. He didn't ask for that. They did not sign up for war until the invasion. That to me is a much more honorable, more heroic, and much braver human being than the person who joins the Reg Force military. And then I've been doing this 35 years. And then this war starts and I go there with all my life experience, all my high training and all my confidence and my wisdom from my age. And I am by far not as brave as that 22-year-old that was driving bus in Zaporizhia, and now he's in a trench getting shelled all day by those invaders. That man is way more of a hero and braver than I am. So I just wanted to make sure that I didn't accept you saying I'm very brave because, yes, okay, I'm very brave, but I can tell you the soldiers I served with, all braver than me, for sure, because they didn't want to be there, and yet they did volunteer. The soldiers that I worked with were all, I would say, I would ask them, when did you join? How much experience do you have? You know, what did you do before? I would say well over 90% joined the day after the invasion on February 23rd. That's bravery and commitment. So I wanted to make sure that you knew that.
But I think all Ukrainians, they have to be thankful for you and also for such soldier like you from other country, because it's not your direct duty to go to Ukraine, but you did it, and that's a good decision. It deserves some respect from the Ukrainian.
Thank you.
Yes, and I want to ask you, how long does it take for the mobilized people to become a real soldier?
Now, fair question, but what do you mean by real? Like where they're actually in combat from when they sign? So when they go to the recruiting office till when they're in combat?
I'm asking this question because lots of complaint in the Ukrainian media that the level of the new soldier it's very different. Sometimes they don't have like enough knowledge to be actually on the battlefield after like 3 months of training.
I understand your question. Because you said real soldiers. So I'm going, well, I again, remember the soldiers that I fought with, the majority of them were signed up on the 23rd. Not all of them, but many that I spoke to, they actually were in combat 5 days later. Some of them were in a trench 2 weeks later because there was a mass mobilization and the enemy was approaching from all sorts. You remember Hostomel, the airport was trying to get taken and they were crossing the bridges from Crimea into Ukraine. And there was an immediate need to put soldiers in those positions. Your actual combat, where your offensive operations, those were the Reg Force military. That was their job. But the TRO, the soldiers who were not soldiers a week ago and now they needed to hold positions. They needed to go. And I talked to some of them. They said they were in combat shooting rifles and taking artillery fire and tank fire from Russians a week after they joined. Now, I think your question is trying to say now, more now. Again, I don't want to say things that I am not wise enough to comment on. So before I comment on now, how the soldiers are being trained now, which I will, but I'll talk about the soldiers that I trained, most every single, except for one or two groups, Vidilina, I think they had been in combat by being in trenches for months and months and months before they met me. And their training was poor. But they were the ones who were put into a trench and said, hold the line, and had very little training. So they would come out and be rotated out of those positions. And then they got sent to a training camp, and that's where they would meet me. And it was a frontline training camp. It was not that far from the front, but then we could train there with some peace without too many artillery or S-300s or mortars, and we could train. And I know from the command staff that ran that area where I worked, they worked very hard at getting the soldiers out and into the training and then back out for more training and then back. Anti-tank training, rifle training, building cleaning training, trench cleaning training, movement drills, and anti-mine, anti-booby traps, how to deal with all of that. The training was nonstop. We never stopped. There was no, of course, in Canada, you train, then you go back to your barracks, and then you go back to normal duty. And then you take a course on machine guns. And then for 6 weeks, hard training, good training. Then you go back to normal duty and you relax. And then you have days off. You have weekend there every day for months and months. All we did was try to train as many soldiers as we could, as fast as we could. And I only saw honorable behavior by the officers trying to train up as many soldiers as they could. And some would say, after we would do some training, they would say, this is fantastic, I need more. But they would go back to their position because the next soldier beside them had no training. So get them out, give them some, then put them back and take them out again. So I have no criticism for the officers. Actually, I have respect. My commanding officer, I went to the Legion first, to the International Legion in Kharkiv. That's where I started. And I did not see a lot of value for me there. And I did not see some things that I liked. So I looked for a place where I could fight alongside Ukrainians and not alongside other foreigners. So I struggled with that. And I tried to say, listen, I have a lot of experience. I have a lot of experience at training as well, not just the skills, but actually how to train. There's a big difference between being a very good soldier and being a very good trainer. A big difference. So some people are fantastic swimmers, but they can't teach other people how to swim. That's another skill. So Lieutenant Colonel, and then the Colonel who interviewed me, he took a chance. No one else was in that brigade that was a foreigner, never. And so I have to say that Colonel Ignatieff took a chance on me, because there's lots of foreigners there that, not lots, there's some foreigners there that are not in the right place. They're not telling the truth about their skills, and they don't belong there. And he didn't know me. He took a chance, and he let me sign, which is what I very much wanted to do to fight for Ukraine. He took a chance on me. And then when he saw my skills, when the Ukrainians saw my skills, they said, "Oh, you can train." And I said, "Yes." And they said, "Oh, let's use you this way." And they gave me the resources. And, of course, some people didn't like that. And the colonel, he said, "What do you need?" And I said, "I need this." And slowly we built a very good relationship. And that colonel worked very hard to train his men the best he could. And so now I'll go, that's my experience. The officer who ran that brigade did everything he could to try to give as much training in the middle of a frickin' war. How are you supposed to train people that if you take them off the line and give them 6 months training, that line collapses and now the Russians own Zaporizhia? Well, you're stuck, right? It's a balance of training and not losing major ground. So today, what are they doing today? Well, I don't have the skills to say what are they doing today, but I do know that the colonel and many of my friends still ask me I still send them drones. I've sent many drones to Ukraine since back in Canada. And I still speak to the soldiers there nearly every day, and sometimes many times a day. And I still speak to the officers, and they still ask me questions. And the 3rd Assault Brigade is asking me questions. How is best to do this? How is this? So they are looking, and that is the best that they can do. They have to try to look for expertise, and then take what this Canadian says, take what this British say, and then use their own combat experience, because they have more than anybody else in the world right now in combat experience in this century, more than anyone. And then bring all those things together to come up with the best tactic. How much training the actual soldier is getting, I can assure you it's a lot better than it was 2 years ago, because the Ukrainians are trying to give their soldiers more Western ideological tactics and training. Because the way I saw it from the old instructors, the Russian way is do it my way and do it this way. And in all, I will speak completely honestly, their way is fucking stupid. It was just ridiculous. And I remember speaking to some old Ukrainian trainers going, "Where do you learn this? This is ridiculous. This is straight out stupid." And they go, "Well, that's the way we've always done it." Well, yeah, that's your problem. And that's why the Russians are losing this war to Ukrainians, because Ukrainians are trying to do it a different way, and the Russians are doing it their way. I can't speak to what today, if you get recruited into the military, how much training you can get. But I can tell you, in my picture, what I saw many officers trying to fight the Soviet way of training and learning and become the Ukrainian way, where you mix the West with the combat experience of the Ukrainians, which is the best in the world, into how to give your soldier as much training as you can before they go into combat.
I have to mention that you also met my father, I believe, during the training in Ukraine.
Yes, amazing man, amazing, humble, intelligent, and incredibly brave man. Like many, but he stood out because he was regular forces. And he was training his men to do something that he did not have a strong skill at doing. And he heard me training my men. We were in the same position, TRO and regular forces. And he heard me training my men. And this was not the normal Ukrainian way. I believe probably many of your listeners are Ukrainian, so I think they understand, but there's lots of privacy and not a lot of interworking of different groups, which can happen in other militaries as well. But it was unusual, let me say that. It was unusual to have a regular forces soldier come up to my translator and say, is it okay if we come and listen? Because I've been listening, because I saw your father on the second floor of this blown up building. I saw him listening on the stairs, just listening to me, and nobody else around. And then he came down the stairs when we had paracour time, and he came up and he asked my translator, can my soldiers come and listen? And I said, absolutely, for sure. And then many men came out of the second floor of the building and poured out. And then I taught. And that's because your father didn't care about ego. We are regular forces. We are TRO. We are SSO. He didn't, in my opinion, he didn't care about that shit. He said, where do we learn the most and learn the best? So our soldiers survive and kill the enemy. That's the objective. Yes? Kill the enemy and survive so that you can keep the civilians of Ukraine safe and keep Ukraine. And that was my mission when I went there. And that was your father's mission when he saw me. And that was not what I saw in many people who were in SSO or in regular armed forces. They have to understand you can always learn more when you work together in many different ways. And that was part of the change. And then when your father did that, I had other soldiers come to me and say, how do you clean trenches? How do you do this? And then I would tell them and they would say, oh, I never thought of that. And they would tell me something. I said, oh, I never thought of that. And then you work together. So, and then your father left. They left our position. And then I saw him again, I believe months later in a village. And I was very happy to see him again. Very honorable man. One of the best I meet there. You should be very, very proud.
Thank you. You already mentioned that to win this war, Ukraine needs advantage in technology, like drones, also the advantage in tactics. And what else does Ukraine needs to win this war?
I think an ability to fight the war with the same weapons that the Russians have, which is a very sneaky way for me to say, and that was a sneaky way for me, now I'll just say it the way it is, the Europeans and the West and any country that wants and values freedom, any country. We always said Herom Slava, yeah? And the heroes of Ukraine. And I said, no, heroes of the world that wants freedom. That's who you're the heroes of. You men, the Ukrainian soldiers I fight with, they are not the heroes of Ukraine. They are the heroes of the free world, of anybody who wants freedom and anybody who walks down the street and gets to make an election and vote for the people who they want, or gets to have some say in what the government does, where they fight wars, and how they protest if they think their government's fighting a war that they shouldn't be fighting. That's who they are. So in regards to the skills that they need, whether it's be more advanced than the Ukrainian or than the Russians with the technology, of course they fight for their homeland. That gives them a different spirit. That gives them, for sure, every there's not a general anywhere in the world that doesn't say soldiers that are fighting for unity and their own land will be more ferocious than soldiers fighting 1,000 kilometers from where they should be. So propaganda and the Russian destructive machinery, they can mess with the brains of people to think that they have a righteous war. They do not, but that can be an advantage to them, where they use their propaganda to make them think that, oh, the Ukrainians are invading our country and they're causing us damage. This is all bullshit, but that's what they can use as their tools. Now, what the West and the Europeans is, they need to give the same tools and technology and weapons that the Russians are using to fight their own war. They're being handicapped. If Russia wants to send missiles from deep inside Russia to hit Kyiv, then we send missiles deep into Moscow to let them know that this is a war that goes both ways. I think that many experts and many political parties in the West and Europe don't want Ukraine to lose. They don't want Ukraine to lose. And I picked those words very carefully. They don't want Ukraine to lose the war. But then the questions that we need to ask those politicians, but do you want them to frickin' win the war, though? Because I think the help that we get there, which is totally required, Ukraine, as brave as the men and women are there, and the civilians, they can't win the war without help from the West. And Russia can't win the war without China and India buying their oil and Iran giving them their drones and China's technology. They can't win either. So everybody needs friends. Well, the friends of Ukraine, which should be the friends of freedom in the world, have to understand, please don't take your mission to be, let's make sure Ukraine doesn't lose. No. The best way for Ukraine not to lose is to give them a fast victory. That's the best way. And then you will maybe also find the fastest peace or the fastest gain of ground, however you see the war ending, which nobody can tell. But that only comes from a mission to win, not to lose. And so Ukraine needs to have those planes and the artillery and the tanks. Those should have been there a year and a half ago. That was because they were saying, oh, Ukraine's starting to lose, we better give them this. Oh, Ukraine's not doing so well, we better give them this. No, how about you give Ukraine all the tools that you have and then let them win and go to a peace where the borders are where they should be. That's my belief, strong belief.
At the end of our conversation, I want to ask you the question, based on what you saw on the ground, when this war is going to be finished?
Oh, Anton, how can you do that to me?
I know it's a difficult question, but
there were some people who think I'm much smarter than I am in Ukraine. And when I was there, they asked me, do you think we get back Crimea? When do you think the war ends? When will we win and get all our land back? They think that I'm somehow smarter than they are. I have more experience in things than they do in combat, but I'm not smarter than they are. I just have my own opinion. And you look at all the experts in the news channels all around the world, how fast they say Ukraine, that's what they do for a living. They have PhDs, doctorates, they're generals, retired generals. They all said Ukraine gone in 10 days. Well, they all wrong. So sometimes the experts don't know anything either, and sometimes maybe the quiet voices should be listened to. But I probably can say this, neither side is going to think they won. And I believe that's a saying from, some people probably know who this general is, but it's a quote from, I think, the Greek days, or maybe the Sun Tzu. There's a quote there that says, winning looks like losing to both the people who pretend to have won. And to say that more simply is, when peace comes and the war is over, I don't think the Ukrainians will be happy, and I don't think the Russians will be happy. That is how peace usually looks. It's unusual. In World War I, there was a winner and it was over. In World War II, there was a winner and it was over. Period. Look at Korea. Korea is still a country cut in half. There's no winner there, and they're still technically at war, that country. There's an armistice, but their war is still on between the North and South Korea, from my understanding. So I think, sadly, when the killing stops and the war is officially over, sadly, I think we set ourselves up for failure if we think that the Russians will go back to the borders where they should be, and the world will support that, and we will allow that to happen, and enough Ukrainians will sacrifice themselves to get to that point, that is what victory looks like. Maybe close to that, maybe not close to that, but sadly, Anton, I think neither side is going to like it. And I don't give a shit what the Russian side thinks. But of course, I care about the amazing people in Ukraine and what they think. I think they will be happy that the war is over, but they won't be happy with how it looks, sadly, unfortunately.
Thank you for your answer. Thank you for your time. And I want to remind of our listener that Peter, the Canadian volunteer and the military trainer, joined our studio and spoke about war in Ukraine and about his experience in Ukraine. You can listen us in Vancouver on 1320 AM every Saturday from 6 to 7 p.m. and in Nanaimo on 101.7 FM every Wednesday from 11 a.m. to 12 p.m. Thank you.
Slava Ukraine.
Героям слава.